Take it away.
Thanks. And thank you for putting one of these in everybody's packet. I really appreciate that. Let me just give you a little bit of context. This was the third edited volume that I've worked on. We crowdsourced this, so I asked my people, my network, who they thought the thought leaders were around technology and young children. As those names came in, we kind of shuffled the deck. Perhaps the most meaningful part of this book project for me is that they said yes. From the UK, from Scotland, from Australia, all over the place, Norway, said yes and wanted to be part of this. So what you have here can be read cover to cover, but also can be dipped into a sample because you have 17 2,000-word essays. So understand that what I asked the academics to do is almost impossible. Write in 2,000 words and not heavily cited at all, just an essay about what's important to you. So as we go through, I'm going to share some of their words. Some of their words may be rock-worthy. We'll see. You may decide that they are. I'm not big on reading presentations, and Chris said the same thing, but in this case, I want you to hear what they had to say as you read what they had to say. So as we get to the quotes, give a listen as well as take a look. So Milton Chen is from the George Lucas Foundation. He wrote the foreword to the book and he created this metaphor. The metaphor was this notion of a conversation between thought leaders about what's interesting. I think that's what happens at Best Imagine. So we may not all be around one table, but in a way we are, and it's a small group. So here's what Milton wrote. Imagine yourself sitting at this distinguished table and how you might contribute to the conversation as a researcher, teacher, media professional, activist, student, parent, or caregiver. Interesting projects might emerge for how families and communities can create the better digital environments we deserve. What could be more important to our democracy than the environment of ideas our children are raised in? And when could be a more critical time in the United States to be paying attention to the environment that our kids are being raised? So this notion of gathering thought leaders around the table, thoughts from the thought leaders is what I've been talking about. So we didn't have a real-time conversation, but in a way, everybody contributed their pieces. And a little like being a record producer, I had to figure out what's the order of the songs, right, as I got these in. So I think there's a flow there. But we looked at key issues, promising practices, groundbreaking research when people had research to talk about, new perspectives, innovative approaches, and whatever innovation means and how we think about that. And where to from here? Which is an expression my friends in New Zealand use all the time, which basically means what's next, right? But where to from here was part of the challenge. So I challenged the authors, 2,000 words, essay, and at the end, and I think a unique part of the book, tell us your other work that people should pay attention to. So they each got a little list about, kind of other things I've written. Then I said, who are the thought leaders you pay attention to? So there's a little list about who they turn to when they're looking for deep thoughts. And I think both those things are really a fun addition. So we're in search today of powerful ideas. And we had Seymour Papert back at our table earlier. When one enters a new domain of knowledge, one initially encounters a crowd of new ideas. Good learners are able to pick out those which are powerful. So your challenge today is to pick out the ideas from these folks that are powerful. Now I've already done a curation because I've picked one idea from each of them to share with you. But see what resonates. And I love that quote from Pepper. So David, who's not here today, wrote about ubiquitous interactivity. And that it's not just ubiquitous tools and devices. It's that really we've created this 24/7 environment for interacting. Here's what he wrote. The concept of screen time has become meaningless in a world where screens bring entertainment, learning, discovery, communication, play, creation, and more. And last night I talked about the dilemma of screen time and how that phrase continues to live on despite all of our attempts to define it differently or more broadly. I didn't say, but at the bottom of each of these slides, you can see the name of the chapter, or the essay that the person wrote. Hey, who's that? You know this guy. Mobile technology has made us the first generation of parents to be physically far from our grown children, but we have the capacity to be psychologically closer. And if I didn't text, and I know that's kind of old school, if I didn't text, I wouldn't have almost daily communication with my 2 adult daughters, one in California, one in Wisconsin, we're in Utah. And it has become the way the whole family shares information, shares a joke, shares something that they saw. So these are technologies for connection. And I think that's what Warren was talking about. His essay is really fascinating. I asked him to look ahead. He's the only author I said, I know where you're going in the book, you're going last. So you get to say what's next. Anybody know Jenny Radisky from University of Michigan? Because the American Academy of Pediatrics came up last night as well. Right? So Jenny's doing some of the best research on this, was a co-author in the most recent update of the position statement, which has been modified over time. Still feels a little prescriptive to me, but does a better job of telling parents what they can do instead of giving them a list of all the things not to do. And that's a big step in the right direction. If their work, social life, stress relief, and the news of the world all contained in one handheld computer, parents describe finding it hard to create boundaries or anticipate when they would get sucked in or stressed out having the whole world in their laps. And we talked a little bit about that last night as well. And you know, Fred lurks here with Max and Warren and I and others. I'm struggling with how do we say to a parent, put down your phone, but not to shame them and not to be critical of them, but to empower them. Because Fred wouldn't have said, put down the phone, right? Fred would have found a positive way to say, I noticed you have your phone with you today, and I noticed that your 4-year-old's right with you. I wonder what the two of you could do that would both be able to use this. So the other thing that Fred was the master of was, we're not going to change parent behavior from looking at my screen too much to never looking at it and only interacting with my child. It's not realistic. It's not going to happen. But Fred would have been very content with baby steps. If you look at it a little less than you did yesterday, right? Over time, then we move the needle. Without conscious reflection about parents' own relationships with their mobile devices, it will be difficult to ask parents to become the media mentors for the children we hope that they will be. So this notion of getting parents to recognize their own digital behavior, understand that the children are watching them. So if I watch you ignore me because you're staring at this, and I'm 4, I'm learning a lesson about what this is for. What this is for you, and to cut everybody else out. Right? Not the intent of the parent, not the intent of the other adult, but this is the lesson that we're passing on. And then this notion of families matter from the Global Family Research Project of Elena Lopez. Family engagement is foremost a shared responsibility of parents and educators for children's learning. Some of you who've been here in the past when I've talked know that the book before this one was on family engagement in the digital age and the notion of how do we use these tools to better engage families in working with teachers and working with their children. Parents are turning to family and friends, teachers, and recommendations from schools for guidance in navigating media. Educators, media developers, and community institutions have a responsibility to help parents access quality resources, use them wisely, and set plans for media use. The other really big word that I wanted to talk about last night, but we didn't have time in the panel, and this is the word of the day in early childhood. Put technology aside, the word of the day in early childhood is equity. And how, once we put technology back into this, how do we make sure everyone has equal opportunity, equal access? And it's not enough to just have access, it's what kids get to do with these things. Because if this is the only technology in the home, is one smartphone, your opportunity to use that as a child is very different from the kid down the street who has a laptop and a desktop and all the rest of it. So we've got to pay attention to that. Lisa Guernsey, who really coined the phrase media mentors, says this: with ideas and guidance from media mentors, educators and parents can learn to take advantage of children's natural curiosity to build their critical thinking skills about all the messages they see and hear. So media literacy, digital media literacy, and empowering kids to start to understand the messages that are coming out, becoming critical thinkers. Michael Levine, who left Sesame and has landed in Noggin in the last week, says this: kids' enthusiasm for digital activities present a great hook for teachers and busy parents to manage their responsibilities. But if educators and parents themselves do not become technically proficient, the full range of digital possibilities and the access to new technological tools will effectively be reserved for the more privileged. That's not equity. Right? That's kind of the opposite of equity. Those that have will have more. Those that don't will never have a chance. We have to pay attention to that and think about that. I like what he said at the beginning about having a hook. Right? So we're worried about kids looking at these things too much, and maybe we want to float the word addiction, although I don't agree that that's relevant for very young children. But, right? But they do have these in their hands. It's already here. There are iPads, there are phones. We can't say, oh, we wish they never would have been invented. They're not going to be uninvented, right? So how do we help children and the adults in their lives think differently about what these tools are for? Sonia Livingstone from the London School of Economics writes a lot about children's rights in the digital age. Children increasingly see digital technologies, along with the digital literacy, agency, and privacy to use them, as their preferred and sometimes only way to access the fundamental human rights across the board. Their preferred and sometimes only way to access their human rights. Powerful, right? A big idea. Children have rights. We want to talk about children's privacy and the protections that we try to put in place, but what's the child have a right to experience online, and how do we define that? Some of you may know Shuley. Designers must be keenly aware of the physical, cognitive, social, and emotional development of the children they are designing for. Well, Warren at every one of these things does his child development meets technology pieces, right? And that's his point. We have to think of the whole child. These are not just cognitive tools. They're not tools that have the absence of gross motor movement, if we think that's important, if we design it in. Do you know the Designing for Children's Guide that Shuley and a bunch of people got together in Amsterdam a couple of years ago? If you don't know that, check it out. I think one of the reasons it's powerful is it's written from the perspective of the child. So the child is asking, do this for me, don't underestimate me, these kind of things. I think it's really great work. Louis Bernstein, who headed research at Sesame Workshop forever, wrote about what he would want to say to all of you as media producers. He'd like to provide guidance to producers and the pipeline and platform owners about their responsibilities and the opportunities they have to contribute to our nation's children and the future of this country. So it's not either or, but we can mess that up or we can seize it and make it a strong positive, right? That's the choice that we all have, and the way in which we do our work, the way in which we create the products that we want children to use, the way in which we help their parents understand what they're learning. Ella Mortella, whose early career was about figuring out what the impact of television on children was, and is a highly regarded researcher, said this: we may find that the affordances of smartphones and tablets are especially helpful learning tools for young children. We may find that. We may do the research and find out we've been all wrong all along and we never should have gone down this path with kids. I don't think that's where we're headed, right? But what she's really saying as a top researcher is the jury's kind of out still. We don't know. We don't have the evidence that says how this works. We're all operating on our best assumptions and our knowledge to create positive things for kids. But there's another part of that. My audience usually is early childhood educators. They're really concerned about this one. They're really worried that these smartphones and tablets have any upside, any positive benefit for young children. So this notion that they could be very positive is flipping that on its head. And it's taking a much more positive look at that. Instead of saying what are the disasters from technology, loss of sleep, obesity, all the things that the media blames all of us for, maybe it's different than that. This is really powerful from Kevin Clark at the Center for Digital Media and Innovation at George Mason. Imagine what would happen if all children read books, saw television programs, watched movies, and played games and presented positive portrayals of people who look like them. Imagine what that world would be like. Some of us with gray hair have been around this field for a while. We were around when children's book publishers were held to task for not having enough diversity and not putting out books that gave children someone that they look like. We're a little behind that conversation, but we have to pay a lot of attention to it. Lydia Plowman from Scotland wrote a really great essay about when technology disappears. And what she's really talking about is when it's so embedded in our lives that you don't even notice it anymore. It just is what it is, right? What happens then, and what's the opportunity? Designing for young children in a world of ambient computing provides a wonderful opportunity to explore the ways in which technology can provide fun, pleasure, and play. Oh, I thought technology was a problem. Is it possible that it could provide fun, pleasure, and play? You see what I'm trying to do here? I'm trying to, all of us, to shift the narrative from what it can't do and why they shouldn't be using it to what it can do and what the benefits are. We've got to flip that over. Jackie Marsh has been doing lots of work in the makerspace and has this group called Makey in Europe. If we view digital literacy as a social practice in which children engage in meaning-making practices in order to express themselves and communicate with others, then it seems appropriate to extend the modes and media available for this to include new technologies such as digital fabrication tools. So what she's saying, if we're going all in on this, then why would we not say all tools are welcome and are part of the conversation? And here's the thing, early childhood educators really panic because to them this is not hands-on play. My hand is on the screen, but they don't see that as hands-on in the same way having blocks in front of me and building something with it. And that's a barrier as well. But when they talk about maker spaces and providing stuff for kids to build with, well, that's right up their alley. That's what they do every day. That's what early childhood classrooms are full of. So the other thing I'm trying to help us all understand is there are some entree points here with educators. Instead of telling them what they don't know, you know all about block play. Well, you know, what's the connection? Trying to help them understand that they don't come to this with nothing. Because they often say to us, I don't know anything about technology. And yet they carry one of these and can't live without it. So in fact, they know a lot. Susan Edwards in Australia writes about digital play. Well, was that a controversy when that phrase hit the early childhood field? Digital play, those are never the twain shall meet, right? And what she's saying is in this age we're in, and with children having these devices, what we really need to do is figure out what's the play pattern. How do they fit in? Not how they keep kids away from playing, but how in fact they support their play. So she said she's thinking about the digital as well as the play, not either or, right? Digital tools, play. We know, we've known forever in early childhood that play is the center of the whole conversation. But that's also why educators have said, yeah, these are getting in the way of it. That's not play. So I think Susan's work is incredibly important. Natalia Kriskova, who's at University of Stavanger in Norway and writes a lot about children's books and does tons of research around, we had that question came up last night around whether ebooks or traditional books are better or not. She does a lot of work there. Here's what she says. If we use technology for motivational ends only, we might support children's learning interests, but not necessarily their learning. Well, that's a powerful little sentence, right? We can motivate them, we can give them, they can have fun, they can have a turn on the iPad if they do something else first, right? If it's this kind of reward system. But are we really helping them learn? And are we really giving them tools for a lifetime of learning? Marina Bears at Tufts University talks about positive technological development. To distinguish high-tech playgrounds from playpens focuses on 6 behaviors that can be promoted through the use of technological playgrounds. Let me just pause. This is a powerful metaphor, right? Playpen, child kept within the playpen, maybe just put in the playpen and the adult goes away, like maybe just given a piece of technology and the adult goes away, versus playgrounds where kids can interact with ideas and each other and move and get excited about it. And you know, sometimes, again, in my tech cautious field, this kind of comparison is really powerful. Because we get that. That makes sense. I get that. I know what you're talking about. So here's what Marina says out of the 6 positive behaviors. Content creation, and we've been hearing a lot about that. Kids as content creators. Creativity, we've heard about that from everybody. Choices of conduct, so how they behave, it is based on choices. Communication, collaboration, community building, we've heard about these in other content, right? Boy, if that's the list, I'm kind of excited about coding and computational thinking, because that's her work, right? I'm kind of excited about iPad. I'm kind of excited about, I can get excited about, because those are really powerful outcomes. And again, in early childhood, if we don't have the list of outcomes, we just have the technology, we're doomed from the very beginning, right? We do not have the ability to connect the dots. If you get around to opening the book at all, read this chapter. Coding is another language, why computer science in early childhood should not be STEM. If you're not in my field, you don't realize how controversial that is, how provocative that statement is, right? This notion of she really believes coding a language and needs to be treated as such, another way of communicating, another way of expressing yourself. But also this notion of we're just dumping everything into computer science, calling it STEM. In my work at the Tech Center, we started to talk about the T in STEM being a lowercase t. That the technology for very young children is a tool for achieving these other things. We're learning about science, we're doing some engineering, we're starting to understand math. That technology didn't need to be a topic they learned about, it needed to be a tool they learned to use, right? So it's kind of fun to think about how this has all evolved. Marina, if you heard her speak, is very good at provocative statements that get you to go, whoa, how do I feel about that? Back to Milton Chen. I know this is long, but these are powerful words. Perhaps it's time to acknowledge that the digital environment is now as immersive, tangible, and vital to life as the physical environment. Creating a sustainable future is becoming as urgent for our children's digital lives as the crises threatening our ecosystems, where extreme weather, air and water pollution, and climate change are on the rise. As internet hacking, fake news, and divisive social media have shown, the climate is changing for our digital world as well. So again, if the notion is how do we protect children, I don't think I ultimately protect children by saying they can't engage in some kind of appropriate social media. I can't control what's out there, right? But it is their world. And so I need to help them and empower them to be able to make choices about the content they see, to have a reaction that they can use when they feel like they're being cyberbullied, for example. Now, these are empowering things. These are giving kids tools to survive and thrive in our world. Of course, I had to write something about Fred Rogers, and I talked about Fred being the media mentor we all need today in the digital age. I said, Fred Rogers was a mentor and role model to parents and caregivers about the importance of bringing every part of who you are into the interactions and relationships with a child. Fred Rogers was Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers was Fred Rogers. You with me on that? Right? There was no, it's time to do the show, I'll become Mr. Rogers now. And Max is going to talk a lot about this tonight, and you'll get a deeper appreciation for that. That's about as fearlessly authentic as you can get, right? He was always who he was. Someone was talking last night at the table about his slow pace, which Chris and I don't suffer from, right? But Fred had this slow pace, and in some cases it drove people crazy. But he didn't slow down because he thought he should. He spoke the way he always spoke. So if you ever met the man, you'd have had a slow-paced, relaxing conversation. So some power there in lessons from Fred. So did we pass the Seymour test? Were there any new domains of knowledge presented? Did you have encounters with thought leaders? Did you crowdsource new ideas? And back to Seymour, good learners are able to pick out those which are most powerful. So that notion of finding the cream that rises to the top. What are the ideas that we just shared this afternoon that really can carry you forward? And then I'm going to go back to Milton again with a provocation. So what table will you take a place at? Where do you want to be to have influence and impact? What place are you going to sit and bring your ideas to? What powerful ideas and interesting projects will you add to this ongoing conversation? This is such an amazing experience where many of us keep coming back, right? These conversations are powerful and rich and deep, and people share what they're thinking and tell their stories in powerful ways that will help others. So that idea about, what do you have to bring to the table is not nothing. You've got a story. What will you do to share your thoughts as a thought leader? Okay, so there's Chip's provocation. I just said thoughts from the thought leaders. And now I said, what are you going to do to be a thought leader? Right? It's not just these people I just introduced you to. What's your thought leadership possibility within your work, within your community, within each other, and within technology? And then one last one from Fred from the movie. Love is at the root of everything. All learning, all parenting, all relationships. Love, or the lack of it. And what we see and hear on the screen is part of who we become. The first time I saw the movie and he said love, or the lack of it, it was like, oh, that's exactly it, right? It can be love, or it cannot be love. Those are the choices adults make, right? So that's going to shape us, whether it's positive or negative. That's my rah-rah for keeping this positive and helping children feel powerful. These are their tools. Who made the comment last night about we're the last generation to be born before all of this? We all want to talk about the generations who now were born into it. But what's the implications for all of us at leading? So I'll leave you there. Thanks.